Everyone, this is Shaden Attia. If you take a look at the bottom right side of your screen, you'll be able to see me and my cat Zata. Hello. After multiple trials of trying to record without him, he really wants to participate in the conference, so here it goes. I am a research assistant and a PhD student at the Faculty of Education at the University of Western Ontario. And today my presentation is going to be about globalization and education. First of all, I would like to give you a very quick outline of the different points that I'm going to be discussing in the presentation. So first of all, I'm going to take a look at globalization and internationalism and the distinction between the two terms. After that, I'm going to take a look at different concepts and how they relate or contradict the term globalization, such as nationalism, mobility, and colonialism. I will be going over other important terms, and from these terms, I'll be mainly focusing on discrimination and more specifically discrimination in education. I'll provide you with different examples of discrimination in education and how critical race theory can be used to fight against discrimination. Globalization and internationalism. Many people mix both terms and they use them synonymously and interchangeably. However, globalization is different from internationalism. And according to Jones 1998, internationalism looks to a world ordered by structures supportive that functionalism, which is embedded in accountability, while globalization looks to the pursuit of interest on the global level through the operation of unfettered capitalism. So you can see that internationalism falls kind of on the positive end of the spectrum, with a world in which people and countries help one another, while globalization is all about interest. It's all about making benefits. It is related to capitalism, and that shows you the big difference between internationalism and globalization. Now I would like to discuss another term, which is nationalism. And nationalism is the idea of total and in some cases blind support of one's nation or country, leading to viewing the nation's interests as more important and valuable than others. To give you a couple of examples related to nationalism, think for example of white nationalists or white supremacists or Trump supporters. So these are people who identify with radical ideas of anything different should not be there and should not exist. So you can think of that as how they view immigrants and people of color and minorities. If you take a look at globalization on the other hand, globalization challenges this idea of nation state, challenges that idea of nationalism, and sheds light on transnational nations with fluid and flexible borders. Nations where citizens are encouraged to travel and make changes in the world. And relating to this idea of flexible borders, we now take a look at globalization and mobility. So, Hartong 2017 highlighted that the idea of mobile citizens is supported nowadays by multiple countries and governments who encourage their citizens to take initiative and change the world. The notion of mobility and global citizens is widely advertised in schools and universities, but it is important to ask yourself some questions. First of all, do you think that all individuals from different races and ethnicities have the same access and privilege of crossing borders? Also, are countries equally welcoming citizens from different parts of the world? Now we take a look at globalization and colonialism. So, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy defined the colonialism as a practice of domination which involved the subjugation of one people to another. In my view, globalization and colonialism are very much related to one another. And I would like to use a quote by Appadurai 2010. He says, "These new things ride on older things, transform and reinvigorate them." And I believe that the new things here means globalization, while the older forms and older things mean colonialism. So colonialism is globalization is just a new form of colonialism. And of course, I do acknowledge, and many people, of course, acknowledge that globalization does have many benefits. However, it represents a new way of colonizing other countries. But this time, it's not through military force, but through using capitalism and economic powers. So here are four important terms that I would like to introduce to you guys in this presentation. First of all, discrimination, which is bias against individuals based on their skin color, race, gender, or religion. White supremacy, and we mentioned white supremacists and white nationalists in one of the previous slides. And it is about the belief of superiority of whites over others from different ethnicities. The third term is privilege, and it is the unfair access to opportunities that are denied to others. And finally, lookism, which is discrimination based on looks. So, in the rest of the presentation, I would like to focus on discrimination and more specifically, discrimination in education. I would like first to highlight a couple of examples of discrimination in education, and then I'll be moving on to critical race theory and how to use it to fight against discrimination. So the first example, this is an excerpt, and it is part of an online advertisement for an English teacher position. And in this ad, the organization or the institute mentions, and I quote, "We do not accept applications from non-native English speakers." End of quote. And the words are capitalized in the original ad, and this kind of discriminatory language is used to discourage non-native English-speaking teachers from applying for the jobs. And this can be one of the first examples in the work field related to discrimination in education. The second example can be found in Wink's critical pedagogy textbook that was published in 2011. And in this quote, an indigenous student was being asked about what Thanksgiving means, and he mentioned, and I quote, that Thanksgiving is about when the white man taught the savages how to plant. And you can see here how curricula and how sometimes teachers represent the idea of the majority, and how these ideas can be embedded in children's minds that at some point they come to believe that this is the truth. Another example that I brought to you is also from Wink's textbook, and she talked about the presence of bigger numbers of students of color or minority students in special education classes, and they are enrolled in these classes because teachers view minority students as culturally and linguistically deficient. Now we move on to critical race theory. So race theories can be a way to fight against discrimination. Critical race theory is an example of a critical theory that fights for social justice and challenges the status quo. And Delgado and Stefancic 2017 identified this movement as a collection of activists and scholars interested in studying and transforming the relationship among race, racism, and power. Even though critical race theory started in the field of law, now you can find its presence in different other fields such as education. Now we move on to how we can use critical race theory in education. So here I bring you just a couple of examples about how to use critical race theory in our field. And the first way is kind of a method or a way that teachers can use in the classroom. And it's about introducing topics such as racism and poverty to students in class and helping them understand what the terms mean and helping them share their examples and their ideas and understanding of these concepts. And we don't have to wait till students are older to discuss these terms with them. Neer and Smith 2013 used stories, and books to introduce first graders to racism, like to concept like racism and poverty. And I believe that this is important for all of us as teachers and educators to introduce these topics to students so that they understand what they need. Another suggestion of using critical race theory in education is in curricula, and it is a suggestion that was mentioned by Delgado and Stepancic in their textbook about critical race theory, and it is using counter storytelling. So I shared with you an example of the indigenous student who was discussing or defining what Thanksgiving is about. And this happened because there was only one version of the story that was represented in the curricula. And in order to fight against that, curricula has to represent counter stories. These counter stories is a way for indigenous communities, and it's a way for minorities to share their own stories and their own version of the story. Another important suggestion is related to teacher education programs. For teachers who are still like in these programs and who just graduated from such programs, it is important for them to understand what critical race theory is, and it's important to understand what discrimination is and what diversity is, and how to handle such concepts and some problems that happen in class in a way that is helpful for all students, to make sure that all students are involved and they are engaged in the class. Finally, in the job market, I believe it is very important to for different organizations to issue statements against discrimination, to make sure that teachers from different religions, colors, and from non-native teachers, to make sure that everyone has a chance to find a suitable job without being discriminated against. Um, I know that, of course, we can't really have questions now because this presentation is recorded. However, I would like to share with you my email, and if you have any questions about the presentation, please feel free to send me an email. And my email is shatiyatu@uwo.ca. And these are the different sources that I used when I was preparing for this presentation. And thank you, and I hope you enjoy the conference.